Don Crane and the Second Amphibious Tractor Battalion were among the first Marines ordered into the assault at Red Beach 2 on Tarawa. He carried himself like one of the island's legendary warriors, yet unlike those remembered in military records, his name never appeared in history books. This is the account of Don Crane, an unrecognized American Marine who steered a first-wave amphibious tractor straight into the heart of the Tarawa Inferno, delivering men across the reef and on to what would become one of the most savage and costly landing beaches of World War II. In October 1941, Don turned 17. Instead of marking the day with a party or celebration, he walked directly into the Marine Corps recruiting office to enlist. His older brothers, each taller and stronger, had all failed the physical exam for one reason or another. Adding to his frustration, the Marine Corps used a quota system before the war, which allowed only about 10 to 12 men per month to sign up from Montana. Don was turned away 3 times in October, November, and December of that year. Then came the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. In its aftermath, the quota system was dropped, enlistment opened wide, and Don's birthday wish was finally realized. He signed his papers in January 1942, joining over 22,000 other young Americans who volunteered to fight. He finished 6 weeks of boot camp in San Diego, enduring the drills, the inspections, and the relentless discipline that stripped him of his boyhood and rebuilt him as a Marine. He had no way of knowing then the enormous price that would be paid in battles to come. Still, he knew he would soon be thrown into combat against Japan. In October 1942, Crane shipped out as a member of the 2nd Marine Division's Special Weapons Platoon attached to B Battery. He boarded the transport President Monroe for the long ocean crossing. Life at sea soon became routine until, midway through the voyage, something extraordinary broke the monotony. South of the equator, the lookouts spotted distant ships. For a moment the Marines feared they had run into Japanese vessels. Then came word over the loudspeaker. The ships were American, and they had just pulled aboard Eddie Rickenbacker, the World War I ace and national hero. Rickenbacker had survived after ditching his Flying Fortress bomber and drifting helplessly for 24 days before being saved. The men crowded the rails for a glimpse, stunned by the encounter. For Crane, the journey continued until the Monroe anchored in New Zealand. He remembered later that when the Marines arrived and saw the place, along with the welcoming women, they were immediately enchanted. Yet there was little time for leisure. Orders soon came down from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The 2nd Marine Division was to seize Tarawa. The man tasked with devising the plan was Lieutenant Colonel David M. Shoup, the division's operations officer. Shoup faced grim realities. Tarawa was protected by a wide, shallow reef that kept the standard Higgins boats from getting close to shore, and the beaches were fortified by heavily entrenched Japanese defenders. Landing craft could not guarantee the depth of water required. Shoup considered a daring alternative. Could the Marines use their amphibious tractors, machines intended only for hauling supplies, to lead the assault? The LVT-1s were thin-skinned, underpowered, and never designed to carry troops under fire. Yet the idea, risky as it was, promised a way to get Marines ashore over the reef and directly into the fight. Shoup's plan, if it worked, could change the course of the Pacific War, and it would thrust Don Crane into history. While the Marines enjoyed the warmth and hospitality of the New Zealanders, Shoup worked tirelessly, crafting the invasion strategy and seeking out men willing to crew the amphibious tractors in combat. In August 1943, Don was reassigned to the 2nd Amphibious Tractor Battalion. Though he had no background with the vehicles, he was immediately fascinated by them. Each LVT cost about $35,000, weighed 23 tons, and looked more like a steel beast than a machine for Marines to drive. Crane began intensive training to become a driver. Day after day, he learned to operate the controls, navigate rough terrain, and handle the vehicle under simulated combat conditions. In less than 3 months, he had gone from rookie to the man responsible for piloting one of the first tractors in the opening wave at Tarawa. That assignment would send him crawling over sharp coral while Japanese gunners zeroed in on the landing force. In late October 1943, 10 of the LVTs assigned to the first wave were hoisted onto the weather deck of the assault transport Virgo at a Wellington wharf. Don's tractor was among them. Before departure, crews outfitted the machines with added protection. Steel plates to shield the drivers, machine guns mounted for extra firepower, and large white identification numbers painted on the stern and cab sides. The vehicles were made as ready as possible for the storm to come. The convoy then sailed for the New Hebrides, where Marines practiced invasion maneuvers for 2 days. When one of the tractors broke down, Don assisted in moving it, back aboard the Virgo, making sure no asset was wasted. On November 13th, the Virgo weighed anchor and headed toward the unknown. The following day, the Marines received word of their true destination, Tarawa. For most of them, it was a name they had never once heard. Yet, in a matter of days, that tiny atoll would become etched into memory as one of the fiercest battlegrounds of the Pacific, and Don Crane's path would carry him straight into the fire. None of us had ever heard the name Tarawa before the officers gathered us on deck 2 days before the invasion. The captains and lieutenants spoke with certainty, telling us the naval and aerial bombardment would erase the defenders completely. They promised us that if any Japanese somehow survived the barrage, they would be broken, terrified, and begging for their mothers. The way they explained it, the landing would be routine, hardly more than a walk onto the sand. Don listened closely, but carried with him a quiet doubt, though orders left no room for questioning. He was assigned to ferry 20 Marines of the 2nd Regiment onto Red Beach 2 to deliver them in his LVT as part of the first wave. Intelligence reports, however, painted a very different picture of the place he was headed. That strip of beach was a fortress. Hidden gun pits crouched beneath barbed wire and concrete obstacles. Layers of sandbags were stacked high along the seawall. Strong points made from coconut logs had been built to withstand shells and bombs. The defenders were not ordinary soldiers, but highly trained Japanese Imperial Marines of the 7th Special Naval Landing Force, veterans instructed to kill every American who dared set foot on that shore. The night before the landing, the transport Virgo crept toward Tarawa under cover of darkness. The sea was calm but heavy with tension. Don later recalled lying in his bunk, whispering prayers, fighting the nerves that made sleep impossible. He forced down steak and eggs, the traditional pre-invasion meal, even as his stomach churned. Then came the order. His tractor, number 41, was swung out on the davits and lowered into the black water. Don climbed inside, took his place at the controls, and guided the machine toward the assembly point. The open ocean slapped against its sides as Higgins boats drew up, transferring their human cargo into the tractors. Each vehicle was designed to carry 18 men, but Don's was packed tighter than that, with 20 Marines squeezed shoulder to shoulder, their weapons and gear digging into one another. The interior was cramped and wet, the waves pouring over the low freeboard so that the men's boots were soaked through before they even neared the reef. In those close quarters, no one spoke much. They were crowded in like sardines, breathing each other's air, their faces set and grim. By 6:48 a.m., the assault force had formed its deadly geometry on the sea. 42 LVTs lined up in 3 single-file columns for the first wave, bobbing on the starboard side. Don's tractor, positioned just right of center, unknowingly faced the section of beach where enemy fire would be heaviest. Behind them, 2 more waves waited, 24 and 21 larger tractors on the port side. The distance from the transport Virgo to the line of departure was nearly 9 miles, the longest ship-to-shore transit attempted in the Pacific campaign up to that point. Don fought the wheel against a stiff headwind and a stubborn current. His machine guided forward by the searchlight of a minesweeper. Hours passed at the controls, the tension gnawing at him while he hunched forward, eyes fixed ahead. Just before dawn, the sky erupted. Navy battleships unleashed their full might, 16-inch shells howling overhead and smashing into the island. The explosions ripped apart trees, dug craters in the sand, and sent smoke boiling upward. The noise was so constant and so overwhelming, it was like standing beneath a thunderstorm made of steel. When the ships finally ceased fire, carrier aircraft swept in, their bombs shrieking as they fell, their guns rattling as they strafed the beaches. Through the narrow slit of his cab's armor, Don caught sight of Betio, the main islet of the atoll. Flames licked skyward, smoke curled thick and black, and for a moment he felt reassured. It looked like nothing could possibly remain alive down there. The island resembled a funeral pyre, a place consumed by fire, a smoldering ruin that surely had buried its defenders. But Don knew better than to rely only on what his eyes told him. His Springfield rifle rested on the deck beside him, close at hand. Just behind him at the .50 caliber machine gun stood Lieutenant Bonnyman Bonnie Little, a man who had once confessed in a letter to his wife that a Marine's greatest fear was not death, but failure to carry out his duty. As the tropical breeze pushed away the shroud of smoke, Don's brief sense of relief vanished. Out of the haze, the island revealed itself not as destroyed, but as brooding and defiant. The bunkers and pillboxes still waited, hidden from his line of sight, the defenders lying silent and watchful with their weapons trained on the water. The Japanese Marines, far from destroyed, were ready. At 8:24 a.m., 6,000 yards from shore, the first wave tractors turned and crossed the line of departure, leaving foaming wakes behind them. Inside Don's vehicle came the sharp commands: lock and load. The cramped cargo hold echoed with metallic sounds, safeties clicking off, bolts snapping back, clips slamming into place as the men chambered the first rounds of their Garands. Lieutenant Little yanked back the charging handle of his heavy machine gun and released it, a round sliding into the chamber. Every man in that tractor understood what was coming. Their mission was stark in its simplicity: get ashore as fast as possible, fight through whatever was left of the defenses, and kill any enemy still standing. He was charged not only with ferrying his men ashore, but with delivering them alive and intact into the fight. Squeezing every ounce of power from the tractor's 150-horsepower Hercules engine, Don wrung about 3.5 knots out of it as he fought. Toward Red Beach 2, steering west of the long central pier while the current doggedly shoved him farther to starboard. For a few taut minutes, an uneasy silence settled over the water. Both sides seemed to hold their breath, fingers hovering above, triggers as they waited for the other to move. The Japanese chose to wait, and with American air and naval fire momentarily quiet, there was no simple way to prevent friendly fire incidents among the attacking force. As the shoreline closed to roughly 3,000 yards, airbursts began. Peppering the LVTs, and any illusions of an uncontested landing evaporated. Don straightened his helmet, glanced at the assistant driver on his right and the radio man on his left, and realized the tractors were already feeling the reef under their tracks. In hindsight, both sides had misread the situation. American planners had placed too much faith in the pre-invasion pounding, while the Japanese had misjudged how the awkward amphibians would behave on the shallow coral. To the defenders' surprise, the lanky tracked vehicles rode onto the fringing coral and sand instead of bogging down, then ground forward. When the Japanese recovered from their disbelief, they unleashed a sudden, vicious fusillade that exposed how many of their positions and weapons had survived the barrage. Without protective air cover or suppressing naval gunfire, Don's Amtrak felt exposed, like a target in a shooting gallery, as it clawed over the reef and gradually gained traction on the sand and broken coral. The reef lay about 800 yards from shore. To his left loomed the pier, and to his right a stranded hull was hammering them with heavy fire. Shells punched through the LVT's sides and bow. Both the assistant driver and the radio operator were killed in the torrent of steel. Gripping the steering levers with everything he had, Don fought the machine toward the bay that separated Red Beaches 1 and 2, heading straight into a zone the Marines had nicknamed the Pocket, a murderous knot of fortifications that would be the last organized line of Japanese resistance on Tarawa and would require 3 days of relentless assaults to reduce. Unaware of the full scope of the danger ahead, Don piloted LVT-41 squarely into the heart of that maelstrom. Maintenance crews later revealed that tests run in New Zealand after the action showed an M1 Garand round could pass clean through the cab's thin armor, information never given to the crews beforehand that would have been deeply dispiriting to know. The cargo compartment offered almost no protection for the men crowded inside, not even the cab plates guaranteed safety. Lieutenant Bonnyman Bonnie Little was killed, tragically proving the dread he had written about to his wife, that the worst fear was not death but failing in one's duty. Don later said he was so absorbed in keeping the tractor moving he scarcely registered the carnage unfolding behind him, though he remembered Little still working his machine gun as long as he could. LVT-41 tore past the reef with dead crew members, flanking the cab, being pounded relentlessly by small arms fire and narrowly missed by 75mm shore batteries at almost every foot of ground. About halfway across the exposed reef, the engine suddenly quit. So intent on getting to the beach, Don did not immediately know that most of the men in the hold had been killed. Whether they died all at once or one after another he could not say. Only that when he crawled out between two bodies into the blinding sunlight, he discovered that only 3 of them had survived. Himself, a wounded rifleman, and the maintenance sergeant. The survivors were hurt and unarmed. They slid off the tractor into waist-deep water and made for the stern as best they could, while the rest of the Marines and nearly all the equipment in the cargo compartment lay destroyed or burning. Despite the terrible cost, the gamble to use LVTs at Tarawa paid a tactical dividend. Of the 42 tractors launched in the first wave, only 8 were knocked out before they crossed the reef, and those that made it ashore carried the first Marines into a battle whose brutality and human toll would become all too clear in the hours and days that followed. Don Crane knew exactly what that shoreline demanded. Of the 23 men crowded into that tractor, only 3 survived, and by what he called divine mercy, he emerged without a scratch. It was almost ironic that the Marine who helped pioneer a new amphibious assault method in the 20th century ended up plunging through the surf and wading ashore, much as Marines had centuries earlier at Nassau in 1776. Don would not abandon the 2 wounded men with him. He cared for them until nightfall and then guided them to a low seawall. He went ashore and, alongside other Marines, helped wrest the atoll from the Japanese in a savage 76-hour fight that nearly wiped out the defenders but cost both sides dearly. Don said he could recall only about 6 or 7% of Tarawa. The rest was blank to him, while the horrible odor of the dead and the relentless roar of combat stayed with him forever. He remembered one Marine who had been shot in the throat and lost consciousness. A corpsman slit the man's trachea and slipped a thermometer casing into the wound to keep him breathing. Of roughly 4,000 Japanese defenders, only 17 remained alive after the 76-hour struggle. Marine losses were staggering. 127 killed and 2,192 wounded, so the victory came at a terrible price. Red Beach 2 bore the brunt of the assault and was struck by 3 of the division's hardest-hit units. Don's Second Amphibious Tractor Battalion lost half its men, and by the end of the fighting 90 of the 123 Amtraks it had employed were disabled. 6 of the 8 LVT-1s destroyed in the opening wave across all beaches, including Don's LVT-41, were knocked out trying to land on Red Beach 2. Remarkably, 3 of the 4 Medals of Honor awarded for Tarawa were earned on Red Beach 2 by Lieutenant Colonel David M. Shoup, Lieutenant William Dean Hawkins, and Sergeant Bill Bordelon, so Don's chosen landing site became known as perhaps the bloodiest beach of the war, and Tarawa itself remains the Marines' costliest across the reef, landing yard for yard. Don later recalled that the island reeked, and that the stench of nearly 6,000 decaying bodies could be detected miles out to sea. He came ashore wearing only the clothes on his back, expecting to reboard the Virgo that same day, when the uniform was ruined. He searched for fresh clothing and found a pack belonging to Lieutenant Alexander Bonnyman that contained a new pair of dungarees. Don did not know Bonnyman then, only that the officer was dead. After the war, he attended a ceremony at Punch Bowl Cemetery in Hawaii when Bonnyman's name became synonymous with supreme bravery and sacrifice at Tarawa, and Don later told Bonnyman's sister that he had worn her brother's clothes while fighting. For Bonnyman's role in seizing a large sand-covered bomb-proof emplacement behind Red Beach 3, he was awarded the Medal of Honor, and his sister said she was glad to know her. Brother had continued to help Marines even after his death. Don remained on the atoll for 19 days, helping recover LVTs and unload Army garrison units, at times wearing Bonnyman's clothes, partly to conceal the Marines' new tactical innovation from the enemy, and the press coverage of the LVT's part in the battle was tightly controlled immediately afterward. After Tarawa, Don made 14 shuttle runs to Tinian, earned a Bronze Star for action in his LVT at Saipan, and survived an explosion at Pearl Harbor while aboard LSTs, bound for Saipan. On a personal note, my uncle Bonnie Little, though he died at Tarawa before I was born, was always remembered in our family for enlisting with pride. Marines understood they might be called upon to pay the ultimate price, and he is still regarded as a true hero in our household. Please credit the banner photograph of the LVT collection area to my grandfather, Arthur John Strange, a second Marine who took the picture. The image also appears in the Marine Corps official holdings at the National Archives and may have been shot by the Corps' photographer. The brave men who fought at Tarawa will always be remembered as heroes. God bless America. My uncle Alexander Pa served with 3rd Battalion, 6th Marine Regiment, 2nd Marine Division at Tarawa, Saipan, and Tinian, and was killed in action on July 30, 1944, on Tinian. The island was declared secure on August 1st. My grandfather Donald Crane passed away a few years ago, and I miss him dearly. Finding articles about him remains fascinating. He was a great hero and patriot to the end, and I am grateful I had the good fortune to hear this story and many others from him. Thank you for preserving